The new panorama mode in E-M10 Mark IV is really interesting. Finally, it is the way it should have been a long time ago. Let's see how that works. I have Peter out there in the fields making an example panorama for us. How is it out there, Peter?
Oh yes, it's a beautiful weather to make some panoramas in this pretty cool location. I have an old harbor behind me, which used to be an industrial area and a harbor, and now they're building it to be a residential area. So I think this is a great place to make some panoramas, and the sun is shining. It's a beautiful weather.
Hi there, my name is Peter Vuosgaard and I am an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And before we start talking about the new panorama mode on E-M10 Mark IV, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell so you get notified when there is a new video online. My channel is all about you getting to be a better photographer and about Olympus gear. But let's dive in. Peter, you have the camera out there. Can you show us how the panorama mode works?
Of course I can. You set the camera to AP mode, which is the advanced photo mode, and you use mode dial for that. Here you have the options. You have live comp, lifetime, multiple exposure, HDR, silent shutter, panorama, keystone comp, exposure and focus bracketing. You choose the panorama mode. The choices you have here is standard and full, and I will talk about those later when I make those panorama images.
But Peter, now show us how you actually make the panorama with the camera when you have everything set up. Is it easy?
Yeah, it is quite easy actually. There are a few things you need to remember or you can set. You can choose the direction of your panorama by pressing the arrow buttons on the arrow pad, and you can choose any direction. I prefer having the camera vertical because then I have higher image. If I use it horizontally, then the image will be a bit lower but a lot wider. But I prefer doing my panoramas like this. And I usually also pan from left to right, but that's just the way I do it. You can do it from right to left, it doesn't really matter, it will still make the panorama.
As you saw, it's a bit different way of making panoramas with the E-M10 Mark IV than it is with the other OMD cameras. With the other OMD cameras you need to take separate images and stitch them in image editing software. But with the E-M10 Mark IV you can pan with the camera and the camera stitches the image for you. I think it's a better way of making. As I said in the beginning, this is the way it should have been a long time ago. And I tend to like the panorama aspect ratio a lot more than the traditional 4:3 or 3:2. Like 16:9 is something that I use quite often when I make images. Somehow I like it, and maybe it's the cinematic look that it gives. Of course, cinematic look is a lot more than just the aspect ratio, but you know what I mean. It's more pleasing to my eye at least. But hey Peter, did you know that EPL9 already had that panorama mode?
Oh, I did not know that. If EPL9 had it, that was launched, I think it's 2018, and there's been 3 OMD cameras after that, plus this is the 4th one. And this is the first one that has this panorama mode. Why didn't they apply it to or have it on the E-M5 Mark III? That's strange. I think it should be in E-M5 Mark III too.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And if you want to stop your panorama, you can press the shutter button. It will stop making the panorama. So you don't have to go all the way around if there is, like in the behind, there's nothing really interesting. All the interesting stuff is in front of me. Now that I have a few shots, I'll send them to you. Let me just press send. All right, did you get them?
Yeah, thanks, I got them. But now let's look at the image quality.
So how is the image quality?
Yeah, it's totally fine. That's what it looks like when I'm checking them on my computer. So, no problem with the image quality, I see.
But there was one thing that I did not mention when I was making the panoramas. And let's wait for the subway or the metro train to go by because it makes a lot of noise. All right, now it's gone. Keep the camera straight when you're making the panoramas. The camera has a lot easier job to stitch the panorama together. If you tilt it like this or this way, or even this way, it has a lot of it has harder time to stitch the panorama. And also if the subject is really close to your camera, then it also has a bit harder thing to stitch the panorama. So for landscapes and things that are a bit more further away from the camera, it works better.
And let's look at some of the images that Peter took. As you saw, there's nothing wrong with the image quality when making panoramas with the E-M10 Mark IV. But one thing I noticed is that the pixel amount is not increased. You would think that if you have a wider image, a large panorama, that you would have more pixels in it. But some of the images that I got from Peter was that there's only 16 megapixels in some of the images, some of them have 20. It depends on if you use standard or full mode. So don't expect to get bigger prints on your panoramas. In a bigger picture, it doesn't really matter, but I was a bit surprised. I thought it would be a lot more pixels that way. So if you want really high pixel amount on your panoramas, then you need to take them separately and stitch them by hand or automatically in post. But all in all, the things that Peter said is that you need to have the camera straight and make a quite steady panning so you get better results. And if you start turning the cameras or if it's tilted, then there might be some weird steps on your panorama. If there is something that is a bit curved thing in the photograph, then it might be a bit not aligned. And that's just to bear that in mind. But otherwise, it works really nicely. And thanks, Peter, for showing us how it works. Peter! Hey, Peter!
Yeah, it was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
And then the conclusion. All in all, it was a fun experiment, and I will probably use that panorama mode on E-M10 Mark IV quite a bit, because that is my go-to camera now with the 12 to 45mm f4 lens. It's just a perfect combination for me. And as I said earlier, I like the wider look on images, and one good thing is that I do not need a wider or ultra wide angle lens with me when I go out and photograph. I can use the panorama mode, the swipe or pan panorama mode on my E-M10 Mark IV, and that's a good thing. I really like it. And if you're more interested in panoramas, here you have a video which is more general about panorama. So if you want to, make individual images on your panorama and stitch them in post, then you might want to watch that video. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.